Caroline Evans had been strong through many storms in her life, but nothing could have prepared her for the sting of humiliation at her own husband's funeral. The church smelled of lilies and roses, James's favorite. He had always loved the garden. Now those same flowers lined the pews and surrounded the polished oak casket that held the man she had loved for 50 years. Caroline sat in the front row, hands trembling, her daughter Emily beside her, holding her hand with gentle strength. "You okay, Mom?" Emily whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. Caroline nodded, unable to speak. What words could describe losing your partner, your anchor, your very breath? As the pastor began the service, memories flooded Caroline's mind: sunset walks, laughter over morning coffee, James whistling as he fixed the leaky sink. She remembered how he had held her hand during her own health scare, how he danced with her in the kitchen long after the music stopped. People continued to file into the church: neighbors, friends, old colleagues. Caroline barely recognized some of them. But one face she could never miss appeared near the side entrance: her son Brandon, tall and stiff in a black suit, and behind him, his wife Brittany, dressed like she was heading to a board meeting, not a funeral. Caroline's heart ached. Brandon looked so much like James, but his eyes, the same kind eyes James had, seemed colder now, distant, and it wasn't the grief. They hadn't visited James once during his final weeks, always too busy, always some excuse. "I should say hello to Brandon," Caroline whispered to Emily. Emily's grip tightened. "Mom, don't. Not now." Caroline stayed seated. She knew the tension between her children had reached a breaking point during James's illness. Emily had begged to try a new treatment. Brittany had pushed for hospice. In the end, it was James's choice, but the fight had left scars. When it was time for family to speak, Emily stood first. Her voice cracked as she recalled learning to ride a bike, science fair projects, and the way James had always shown up, even when no one else did. Brandon declined to speak. He sat stone-faced, with Brittany whispering constantly in his ear. Then it was Caroline's turn. She stood slowly, her legs stiff with grief. At the podium, she took a deep breath and looked out at the crowd. "James was my husband, my best friend, my partner through every season of life," she began, voice quivering. 50 years of love deserves tears." As she continued, her voice strengthened. "We had our struggles like any couple, but we always faced them together." And then, right as she was stepping down, Brittany leaned over and said, loud enough for nearby mourners to hear, "Look at those crocodile tears." She shouldn't even be crying. Everyone knows they were practically separated. A wave of gasps spread through the church. Caroline froze mid-step. The words struck like ice to her chest. Emily's face darkened with fury, ready to speak, but Caroline gently squeezed her hand. Brandon didn't say a word. He didn't correct his wife. He didn't even look at his mother. Caroline returned to her seat in silence. 50 years of marriage reduced to whispers and pitying glances, all because of a cruel comment and a son who stayed quiet. But what Brittany didn't know, what none of them knew, was that James had prepared for this very moment. And the will was about to speak louder than anything Brittany could ever say. Back at home that night, the silence was unbearable. Caroline sat by the window with a cup of untouched tea, staring out at the darkened street. The flickering porch light was the only movement, besides the echoes of her memories. James had always been the steady one. When life was unpredictable, he was the calm in the storm. They hadn't had a perfect marriage, but it had been honest, loyal, enduring. Through miscarriages, job losses, health scares, they had walked through everything together. 50 years. And now, in front of friends, neighbors, and God, that legacy had been smeared by a woman who had only been in their lives for 6. Caroline closed her eyes and thought of the early days. James proposing with a modest ring under an old oak tree in Kentucky. Their children being born, first Sarah, then Brandon, then Emily. The backyard barbecues. The nights James read to the kids while she folded laundry. But in recent years, something had shifted. The phone calls from Brandon grew shorter, less frequent. Brittany always had a reason why they couldn't visit conferences, charity events, real estate closings. Caroline remembered the first time James voiced his concern. It had been 3 years ago, just after he was diagnosed with cancer. They were sitting on the porch, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. "I don't like how she talks about money," James had said. "She's just practical," Caroline replied, trying to give her daughter-in-law the benefit of the doubt. "No," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. "She's watching our illness like it's a window of opportunity." Caroline had felt it too, deep down. The questions Brittany asked about the house deed, the life insurance. At first, she assumed it was concern for Brandon. But over time, it became clear Brittany wasn't worried about James. She was worried about assets. Then came the arguments. When Emily suggested a clinical trial for James's cancer, Brittany shut it down immediately. It's a waste of money. We should make him comfortable, not desperate. Brandon didn't argue. He never did anymore. That night, James took Caroline's hand and whispered, "I need to make things right, just in case." He didn't say more. But he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. And Caroline knew he was already planning for the moment when love would need to defend itself. The morning after the funeral, Caroline dressed in quiet resolve. Her black dress still hung on the back of the bedroom door, but she chose a simple gray blouse and slacks instead. Today wasn't about mourning. It was about truth. James had arranged for the will to be read immediately after his funeral, not a week later. Not once emotions had cooled. He had wanted everything out in the open while faces were still fresh with grief or guilt. The lawyer, Mr. Donovan, had been James's attorney for over 30 years. As Caroline and Emily arrived at his downtown office, Brandon and Brittany were already waiting. Brittany scrolled on her phone. Brandon sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. "Let's hope this doesn't take too long," Brittany muttered to her husband. "We really need to start thinking about what to do with the house. The market's crazy right now." Caroline heard it, but said nothing. Emily, however, gave Brittany a sideways glare sharp enough to cut glass. Mr. Donovan entered carrying a thick file. "Before we begin," he said, "James left a letter. He asked that it be read aloud first." He handed the envelope to Caroline. Her name was written in James's handwriting, steady and deliberate. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "My dearest family. If you're hearing this, I've already moved on to whatever's next. Don't mourn too long. I've made peace with my journey. Before we get to the legal details, I want you to understand the heart behind my decisions. Caroline, my love, thank you for 50 years of loyalty, laughter, and patience. You were the compass that always pointed me home. Emily, your strength gave me hope in my darkest hours. Stay close to your mother. She'll need you. Brandon, son, I've watched you struggle. And while I never stopped loving you, I couldn't ignore the path you've taken. I hope one day you find your way back to the man you used to be." These choices were not made out of anger. They were made out of love, clear-eyed and deliberate. What I've built in this life, I hope will serve a greater purpose after I'm gone. Love always. Dad? Silence settled in the room like fog. Then Mr. Donovan adjusted his glasses. To Caroline Evans, I leave the family home at 74 Pinewood Lane, free and clear of mortgage, along with a monthly stipend of $4,000 for the remainder of her life. Caroline nodded gently. She had expected this. That house held every memory. To Emily Rose Evans Moore, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my collection of first edition books. Emily gasped softly. James's books were his pride and joy, his way of preserving stories. It was a legacy of imagination and wisdom. Mr. Donovan paused, letting the air settle. To Brandon James Evans, I leave the sum of $10,000. Brittany's head snapped up. "That's it?" she hissed. Brandon looked stunned, blinking as if he hadn't understood. But Mr. Donovan raised a finger. "However, James has also established a trust in the amount of $250,000 for his grandson, Eli James Evans, to be used exclusively for education, healthcare, and basic needs. Caroline Evans and myself are named as co-trustees." Brittany's face flushed. "What does that mean, exclusively?" "It means," Mr. Donovan said calmly, "you won't have access to it." Brittany's lips tightened, her fingers curling around the edge of her purse. As for the remainder of the estate, Mr. Donovan continued, including all investment accounts, retirement savings, and insurance policies, James directed these funds to be donated to the James Caroline Evans Foundation, supporting pediatric cancer research. Caroline froze, her breath catching. They had talked about this years ago when their first daughter, Sarah, had died of leukemia at age 7. "He did it," she whispered. Brittany shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. Brandon is his only son. He deserves more." Mr. Donovan remained composed. James anticipated a challenge. He left detailed financial records, including over $300,000 already given to Brandon loans for business, a luxury car, the down payment for your house. Contesting the will would make those records public. Brandon's face paled. Brittany's jaw tightened. He can't do this. Oh, but he did, Caroline said softly. And James had done it with precision only love could inspire. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, Brittany had taken to Facebook, posting a carefully crafted paragraph cloaked in grief and subtle accusation. She claimed James had been manipulated into changing his will, while on medication, that Caroline and Emily had turned him against his only son in his final days. She painted herself and Brandon as victims left out, betrayed, and heartbroken. She even tagged cousins and old church friends. Emily said over the phone, voice tight with anger, "People are commenting, Mom. Some of them believe her." Caroline sat at the kitchen table, phone buzzing beside her, tea gone cold. A part of her wanted to reply to every message. Another part knew it would only add fuel to the fire. "She's stirring sympathy," Emily continued. "She wants people on her side so Brandon will feel pressured." Caroline didn't respond, because deep down she feared that was already happening. The doorbell rang just as another notification lit up her phone. Through the peephole she saw Brandon alone. His face was pale, jaw tight, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. She opened the door without a word. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She stepped aside, motioning toward the living room. Brandon walked in like a man carrying invisible weights. He didn't sit right away, just stood by the fireplace where James's photo now rested. "Rebecca, sorry, Brittany," he corrected himself. "She wants me to contest the will. She says Dad wasn't thinking clearly, that we can fight this." Caroline folded her hands in her lap. "And what do you think?" Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know. We've got debts, Mom. Brittany's businesses haven't gone well. She's been counting on this." "So she married you expecting your father's money to fix her mistakes?" Caroline asked, calm but direct. He flinched. "It's not like that." "Isn't it?" He didn't answer. The silence spoke for him. "Dad saw what was happening, Brandon," she said softly. "He saw how she isolated you, how she made you choose between her and your family." "I thought he just didn't like her," Brandon murmured. "I didn't know he saw that much." "So he saw everything," Caroline said, then stood and walked to the bookshelf. From the top drawer she retrieved a worn envelope. "Your father left this with his lawyer, for me, to use if necessary." Brandon looked confused. "What is it?" Caroline handed it to him, proof of what she's done, her spending, her intentions, even conversations she never thought he'd see. He opened the envelope slowly, brows furrowing as he read. Bank records, private messages, a consultation letter from a divorce attorney dated 3 months before James died. Brandon sat heavily on the couch. "She was planning to leave me," he whispered. "Once she got the money," Caroline confirmed. He covered his face with both hands. "All this time I defended her. I turned away from you, from Dad, and she." "She used you," Caroline said gently, "but now you get to decide what you do with the truth." And in that moment she saw it not just grief in her son's eyes, but awakening. James had known the day would come when Brandon would need the truth. And now, it was here. That night, Brandon didn't go home. He stayed in his old bedroom, the one still lined with faded posters of baseball players and college pennants from another life. Caroline passed by the doorway once, watching as he sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, eyes locked on nothing. She didn't say a word. She just left a blanket folded at the foot of the bed and closed the door. The next morning, he came into the kitchen with swollen eyes and a silence that said more than any apology ever could. Over coffee, he spoke quietly. "She gave me an ultimatum last night, said I had to choose her or you." Caroline set down her mug, heart aching at the familiar pattern. "And what did you say?" "I didn't," he admitted. "I walked out." He looked up at her then, the same boy who used to run to her arms when he scraped his knee. "I didn't know where else to go. I didn't know what to believe anymore. But when I read that letter from Dad, when I saw those documents, it was like something broke open." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "You don't have to explain. Just being here, choosing to see is more than enough right now." "I chose her over you and Dad," he whispered, over and over. "We never stopped loving you," she said gently. "Not for a moment." He swallowed hard, then stood, pacing the floor. I don't know what to do. She's already talking about taking Eli and moving out of state. Says if I don't contest the will, she'll make sure I never see my son again. Caroline's stomach turned. That's not love, Brandon. That's control. He nodded slowly, the truth finally sinking in. I know. Then he paused, eyes resting on the envelope still lying open on the table. Does anyone else know about this evidence? No, just you, me, and Mr. Donovan. Brandon took a deep breath. Then it's time someone else heard my side. He pulled out his phone and began typing. Caroline watched as his fingers moved over the screen, his jaw clenched in quiet resolve. I've been silent too long, he read aloud. Out of respect for my father, I didn't speak. But I won't let lies define our family. He hit post and looked up, tears shimmering in his eyes. It's not everything, he said. But maybe it's a start. And for the first time in years, Caroline saw not just her son but the man his father had always believed he could be. Within minutes, Brandon's post began gaining traction. Comments of support poured in from cousins, old friends, even former co-workers who hadn't spoken to him in years. Some wrote simply, "We always knew," while others left longer messages about how proud James would be. There were, of course, a few dissenting voices, people caught up in Brittany's polished charm. But the tide was shifting. She's threatening to take Eli and disappear, Brandon said later that afternoon, scrolling through his phone. She says I'll never see him again unless I make this right. She's bluffing, Caroline said quietly, but firmly. And even if she isn't, your father didn't leave us defenseless. She reached for the manila envelope again and pulled out a separate folder, this one, labeled Custody Legal Contingency in James's neat handwriting. Your dad didn't just plan for the inheritance, she explained. He planned for this. For Eli. Inside were more documents, copies of financial records showing Britain had siphoned funds from Brandon's accounts into her own, letters of intent from James outlining Brittany's attempts to coerce decisions regarding his medical care, and even statements from Ellie's school counselor noting erratic behavior in Britain teen. This is everything, Brandon said, flipping through the papers in disbelief. He kept it all. James knew how far she might go. He saw how she used Eli as leverage to keep control. He wanted to make sure you had a path to protect your son. Just then, Caroline's phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Donovan. Papers filed per James's instructions. Court date for custody hearing set. Brittany has been served. She read the message aloud. Brandon stared, wide-eyed. He really did all this? He asked. Caroline nodded. He always thought 3 steps ahead. Brandon sat back, the weight of years of confusion, guilt, and helplessness beginning to lift. He believed I could fix this, that I'd find my way back. He never stopped believing in you, Caroline said, not even for a moment. That night, Brandon stayed up late in the den, reviewing everything James had left behind, every account number, every notarized statement, every document prepared for the day Brittany would try to burn everything down. But James had built the fireproof walls before he ever got sick. And now, with Caroline at his side and the truth finally in his hands, Brandon was ready to fight not just for himself but for his son, and for the legacy his father had spent a lifetime building. 1 year after James's funeral, the backyard echoed with laughter. The grill sizzled as Brandon flipped burgers, using the same long-handled spatula James had once sworn by. Emily arranged a tray of fresh fruit, while Caroline watched her grandson, Eli, dart across the lawn in pursuit of a butterfly. The garden had been trimmed and replanted. New blooms thrived where old ones had wilted, much like their family. So much had changed in 12 months. The custody hearing had been tense. Brittany fought viciously, spreading lies about Brandon's mental health and finances. She claimed Caroline was manipulative, unfit to be near a child. But the evidence James left behind had spoken louder than any accusation. The judge saw through the facade. Brandon was awarded full custody. Brittany was granted supervised visitation, though she moved to California shortly after, and had only seen Eli twice since. She never wanted Eli, Brandon had said once. She just didn't want to lose. Now, father and son lived 3 blocks from Caroline. Eli walked to her house after school, often staying for dinner. The wounds were still healing, but each visit, each laugh, each game of cards helped stitch them closed. As Caroline helped clear dishes from the picnic table, Brandon approached with a small leather notebook in hand. I found this yesterday, he said, eyes misty, in one of Dad's old toolboxes. Caroline took it gently. James's journal. She recognized his handwriting instantly. They sat at the kitchen table together and opened to the first page. Legacy isn't what you leave in the bank. It's what you leave in people. Brandon leaned in closer, silent and still. And Caroline read aloud, as if James were sitting with them sharing his last reflections, his quiet courage, and his enduring love. Not just for her, but for all of them. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Caroline sat on the old porch swing James had built decades ago. The journal rested in her lap, open to the last page, his final entry. Trust in yourself, trust in our son, and trust that the roots we planted together will hold. The screen door creaked. Eli stood there in pajamas, holding his stuffed bear. "Grandma, Dad said I could sleep here tonight. Is that okay?" She smiled, heart full. "More than okay. You can sleep in Grandpa's study. He'd like that." And just like that, the Evans family began again with strength, with truth, and with love. James Evans may have passed on, but his love never left. He protected his family not with anger or revenge, but with wisdom, clarity, and compassion. He saw what others refused to see. He planned for what others ignored, and in doing so he gave his wife and son the gift of freedom from lies, from guilt, and from manipulation. Sometimes the quietest voices leave the loudest echoes. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like, share, and comment your thoughts and where you're watching from. Because stories like James's remind us, love never dies and truth always finds its way home.